Been a long time. Okay, so Sylvester, chapter 16. The encounter in the park decided the matter. Sylvester was not to be immediately rebuffed. He had certainly made it almost impossible for Phoebe to do so, but this was a consideration that only occurred to her after she had made her decision. Without standing in the smallest danger of losing her heart to him, she found his company agreeable, and would be sorry to lose it. If he was trying to serve her as he had served the unknown Miss Wharf, there could be no better way of discomfiting him than by receiving his advances in a spirit of cool friendliness. This was an excellent reason for tolerating Sylvester. Within a very short time, Phoebe found another. With the return to London of so many members of the ton, quite a number of invitations arrived in Green Street, and Phoebe, attending parties in some trepidation, rapidly discovered the advantages attached to her friendship with him. Very different was her second season from the first. Then she had possessed no acquaintance in town, she had endured agonies of shyness, and she had attracted no attention. Now, though the list of her acquaintances was not large, she attracted a great deal of attention, for she was Salford's latest flirt. People who had previously condemned Phoebe as a dowd, with neither beauty nor style to recommend her, now discovered that her countenance was expressive, her blunt utterances diverting, and her simplicity refreshing. Unusual, that was the epithet affixed to Miss Marlowe. It emanated from Lady Ingham, but no one remembered that. A quiet girl with no pretension to beauty must be unusual to have captured Sylvester's fancy. There were many, of course, who could not imagine what he saw in her. She would never rival the accredited toasts or enjoy more than a moderate success. Happily, she was satisfied merely to feel at home in society, to have made a few agreeable friends, and never to lack a partner at a ball. No lady whose hand was claimed twice in one evening by Sylvester need fear that fate, nor did Sylvester stand in danger of being rebuffed while he continued to treat her with just the right degree of flattering attention. His motive might be perfidious, but it could not be denied that he was a delightful companion, and one, moreover, with whom it was not necessary to mind one's tongue. His sense of humour, too, was lively. Often, if a fatuous remark was uttered, or someone behaved in a fashion so typical as to be ludicrous, Phoebe would look instinctively towards him, knowing that he must be sharing her amusement. It was strange how the dullest party could be enjoyed because there was one person present whose eyes could be met for the fraction of a second, in wordless appreciation of a joke unshared by others. Almost as strange as the insipidity of parties at which that person was not present. Oh no, Miss Marlowe, though fully alive to his arrogance, his selfishness, and his detestable vanity, had no immediate intention of repulsing Sylvester. Besides, he had provided for her use a little spiriting mare, with a silken mouth, perfect in all her paces, and as full of playfulness as she could hold. Phoebe had cried out involuntarily when first she had seen the Firefly. How could Mrs. Newberry bear to let another ride her beautiful mare? Mrs. Newberry did not know how it was, but she preferred her old dear Jupiter. Phoebe understood at once. She herself owned a cover hack long since past its prime, but still and always her favourite hack. It was not long before she had discovered the truth about the Firefly. Major Newberry, very smart in his scarlet regimentals, had seen his wife and her new friend off on their almost daily ride one day. He had come out on the step leading up the door of his narrow little house, and no sooner had he set eyes on the Firefly than he exclaimed, "Is that the mare Sylvester gave you, Georgie? Well, by Jove!" Phoebe had been standing just far enough away to make it possible that she had not heard either this remark or the Major's subsequent and conscience-stricken, "Eh? Oh, just so, love. Forgot." For a rather dreadful moment she had wondered what she ought to do. Then she made up her mind to pretend that she had not heard, prompted as much by consideration for Georgiana as by reluctance to forego her rides. Sylvester had been right when he had prophesied that she and Georgiana would deal extremely. Each took an instant liking to the other, and since the Dowager raised no objection, Phoebe became a frequent guest in the Newberry's haphazard house. Lady Ingham said they were a ramshackle pair. Phoebe, who had hitherto attended only large formal parties in London, thought them delightful, and enjoyed nothing more so much as the evening she spent in their very ill-run house. One never knew what might happen at one of George's parties, said Lord Yarrow, declaring that he had once arrived 5 minutes after the crystal chandelier in the drawing-room had crashed to the floor, and had found Georgie standing like Dido amongst the ruins of Carthage, only rather more composed. Sylvester agreed that this had been a remarkably good party, but contended that by far the best evening he had yet spent in the establishment was that on which the new butler, having admitted him into the hall, had fallen flat on his face in a drunken stupor. Phoebe had never dreamed that people could be as gay and as unceremonious as they were in Georgie's house, nor had she ever liked Sylvester as well as when she saw him there amongst his intimates. It might be another instance of his pride that he could show his most agreeable side only to his relations and his closest friends, but it was impossible to deny that that side was endearing. He was just as charming when the projected expedition to Richmond Park took place, and even more surprisingly, since the original party was augmented by 3 persons, one of whom was not very acceptable to him. He welcomed the news that Major Newberry was to join it when his sister-in-law, hearing of the scheme, announced that she would come too, with her brother Charles. He bore it with equanimity. But when the day dawned and it was discovered that Ianthe, instead of by her brother, was escorted by Sir Nugent Fotherby, even the Major, not famed for perspicacity, informed his wife in a penetrating whisper that he had a very good mind to tip the double, since he clearly saw that this expedition of pleasure was bitched at the outset. For an anxious minute it did indeed seem that it was doomed to failure. It had been arranged that Ianthe and her brother would meet the rest of the party at the Roehampton gate, having sent their horses on in charge of a groom, a last-minute alteration in the plan which was only made known to Sylvester when he arrived at the Newberry's house to escort the party. He looked vexed when the message was repeated to him and exclaimed, "Good God, Georgie, why didn't you tell Ianthe that if she didn't choose to go with us she might remain at home? She'll keep us waiting an hour, and very likely more." "I dare say she will, but it's of no use to fly into a pet with me," responded Georgiana calmly. "I received her note not 20 minutes ago, and all I could do was to send the footman back to her with a reminder that since you had the tickets of admission, she must take care not to be late." "Much good that will do," he observed. But when they reached the Roehampton gate, he was agreeably surprised to find his sister-in-law already there, and was beginning to feel quite in charity with her when he suddenly perceived that the sprig of fashion was not her brother, but Sir Nugent Fotherby. He stiffened, the expression of easy good humour on his face changing in a flash to one of haughty astonishment. Phoebe, obliged to repress a strong desire to tell him precisely what she thought of such odious self-consequence, could only be sorry for Sir Nugent. Her pity was wasted. Sir Nugent knew that Sylvester did not like him, but it never crossed his mind that Sylvester or anyone else held him in contempt. If he could have been brought to believe it, he would have known that Sylvester was queer in his attic, and he would have been very much shocked. When Sylvester raised his quizzing glass, he was not at all unnerved, because it was plain that Sylvester was studying the exquisite folds of his neckcloth. He was not surprised. He would have been disappointed if it had cost him so much time and skill to arrange what had cost him so much time and skill to arrange had attracted no attention. It was not everyone who could tie an Oriental. He was pretty sure Sylvester couldn't, and if Sylvester were to ask him how it was done, he would be obliged to tell him that it took years to learn the art, and often several hours of concentrated effort to achieve a respectable result, which, when one had learnt it, other men might envy Sir Nugent. They could not despise him, for his pedigree was impeccable. His fortune exceeded £60,000 a year, and he had it on the authority of those boon companions whom Lord Marlow rudely stigmatized as barnacles, that, just as in all matters of fashion he was the finest pink of the ton, in the world of sport he figured as a nonpareil, a regular top of the trees, a sure card, up to all kinds of slums, never to be beaten on any suit. His imperviousness to insult saved the day's pleasure from wreck. He seized the earliest opportunity that offered of edging his showy chestnut alongside Sylvester's hack for the purpose of drawing his attention to the circumstance of his having, as he phrased it, brought Lady Henry bang up to the mark on time. "You are to be congratulated," said Sylvester, in a discouraging tone. "Devilish good of you to say so, Duke," responded Sir Nugent, acknowledging the tribute with a slight bow. "Don't mind owning it wasn't easy. Took a devilish deal of address. If there is a thing I pride myself on, it's that. Lady Henry, I said, well, not to cut a wheedle with you, Duke, I put it devilishly slightly stronger than that. My love, I said, we shan't turn his grace up sweet if we keep him kicking his heels in the rendezvous. Take my word for it." And she did. In spite of himself, Sylvester's face relaxed. She did, asseverated Sir Nugent gravely. "My sweet life," I said. "You've no objection to that, Duke." "Not the least in the world." "You haven't?" exclaimed Sir Nugent, slewing his body around to stare at Sylvester, an exertion which the stiff points of his collar and the height of his oriental tie made necessary. "Why should I?" "You've put your finger in the knob, Duke," said Sir Nugent. "Why should you? I can't tell, and I believe I've cut my wisdoms." "My love," I said, "if you've no objection. You've got a maggot in your idea pot." "And what had she to say to that?" inquired Sylvester, conscious of a wish that Phoebe had not cantered ahead. "She denied it," said Sir Nugent. "Said you were bent on throwing a rub in our way." "Oh, just what I said myself." "Oh, yes, I said." "Not my love?" "Not then, because I was surprised. You might say I was betwaddled." like a duck in a thunderstorm. No, said Sir Nugent, giving this consideration. I fancied, Duke, that if you were to ask all around the ton if Sir Nugent Fotherby had ever looked like any species of fowl in such a situation, the answer would be, in a word, no. Well, I haven't the least desire to throw rub in the way of your marriage to my sister-in-law. You may marry her with my good will, but you will not prevail upon me to relinquish my nephew into your care. But that's another rub, objected Sir Nugent. You may say it's the primest nub of all. Her lordship won't give him up. A man of your address must surely be able to persuade her to do so. Well, that's what I thought myself, said Sir Nugent. Queer creatures, females. Devilish attached to the infantry. Let us discuss the matter. No, let us do no such thing, interrupted Sylvester. Talking to me will pay no toll. I have only this to say. I have neither the power nor the desire to scotch your marriage to Ianthe. But there is no argument you can advance that will induce me to delegate the least part of my authority over Edmund to you or to anyone. Try if you can twist Ianthe round your thumb. Don't waste your time on me. He spurred his horse forward as he spoke, and cantered on to overtake the rest of the party. Phoebe, meanwhile, after enjoying an all too brief gallop, had been forced to pull up and to continue at a walking pace beside Ianthe, who wanted to talk about herself, and had found Georgiana an unresponsive audience. She disclosed that she had brought Sir Nugent to a place in place of her brother because she was convinced that Sylvester disliked him because of mere prejudice. He was barely acquainted with Sir Nugent. Did not Phoebe think that if he were given this opportunity of getting to know him better, he might well reconsider his cruel decision to part a mother from her child? Phoebe found it impossible to answer this question, since a flat negative was clearly ineligible. Fortunately, Ianthe was more interested in her own opinion than in Phoebe's, and had posed the question in a rhetorical spirit. Without waiting for an answer, she continued. For my part, I am persuaded that Sylvester must be agreeably surprised in him. I don't mean to say that his understanding is superior, for it is not. In fact, he has a great deal less than common sense, and is sometimes quite addle-brained. But if I don't care for that, I'm sure I don't know why Sylvester should. His disposition is amiable, and his manners excessively polished and civil. He is a man of rank and of the first air of fashion, and if he does associate with inferior persons and fritter a fortune away in gaming hells, that will cease when he is married. And as for his race-horses, he is so wealthy that losses on the turf can't signify. In any event, it is nonsensical to suppose that it would do Edmund the least harm. Besides, Sylvester must own that there can be no one better able to teach Edmund just how he should go on in all matters of taste and ton. He is always high in the high kick of fashion, and makes the other men appear positively shabby. You have only to look at him. Phoebe looked instead at her, and in wonder. Besides Sylvester's quiet elegance and Major Newbury's military cut, she had been thinking that Sir Nugent presented all the appearance of a coxcomb. He was a tall man, rather willowy in build, by no means unhandsome, but so tightly laced in at the waist, so exaggeratedly padded at the shoulders, that he looked a little ridiculous. From the striking hat set rakishly on his Corinthian top, he had already divulged that it was the new dash and the latest hit of fashion, to his gleaming boots, everything he wore seemed to have been chosen for the purpose of making him conspicuous. His extravagantly cut coat was embellished with very large and very bright buttons. A glimpse of exotic colour hinted at a splendid waistcoat beneath it. His breeches were of white corduroy, a diamond pin was stuck in the folds of his preposterous neckcloth, and he wore so many rings on his fingers and so many fobs and seals dangling at his waist that he might have been taken for a jeweller advertising his wares. Phoebe was not obliged to make any comment on Ianthe's last observation, for Sylvester overtook them just then, and a minute later Sir Nugent ranged alongside, trying to convey to Ianthe by a series of shrugs and grimaces, which nearly overset Phoebe's gravity, that his mission had not prospered. She stole an apprehensive glance at Sylvester, fearing that Sir Nugent had put him out of temper, and was relieved to see no trace of the cold look of indifference she so much disliked. He looked rather amused, and when he addressed Sir Nugent it was in a light, good-humoured tone. Encouraged by this, Sir Nugent, who had been looking dejected, brightened and asked him for his opinion of the horse he was riding. He won so courteous a reply that Phoebe took her underlip firmly between her teeth, and stared resolutely ahead. Sir Nugent, gratified by Sylvester's salve of praise, drew his attention to the chestnut's manifold excellences, and confided that he had bought the animal at a devilish long price. A stifled sound from Phoebe, who knew just how long a price he had paid, made Sylvester's lips quiver. "Oh, they're so cute." But he said, without a tremor, "Did you indeed?" It might have been thought odd conduct in a sporting man to use his hunting for hacking at the end of the hunting season, but this idiosyncrasy was not as inhumane as it seemed to the uninitiated. Sir Nugent was a member of several hunts, and he owned an astonishing number of horses, which he stabled all over the country. stabled all over the country and seldom rode. When he did turn out, it was rarely that he went beyond the first few fields, for, like Mr. Brummel when he had led the ton, he wore white tops to his boots and feared to get them splashed. Lord Marlowe's showy chestnut certainly looked to be more in need of exercise than of rest, and succeeded by sidlings, plungings, and head-tossing in giving Sir Nugent an uncomfortable ride. As soon as he could contrive to do it without the appearance of incivility, Sylvester suggested to Phoebe that they should shake the fidgets out of the horses. She agreed to it in a strangled voice. The Firefly broke into a canter, lengthened her stride to a gallop, and in a few moments carried Phoebe far beyond earshot of Iant and Sir Nugent. Beside her thundered Sylvester's black, but neither she nor Sylvester spoke until they presently reined in at the end of the stretch of greensward. Then, as Phoebe bent forward to pat the Firefly's neck, Sylvester said in a voice of mock censure, "Miss Marlowe, I had occasion once to reprove you for laughing at rustics. Now I find you laughing at the very finest pink that blooms in the ton. You are incorrigible." "Oh, I didn't," she protested, gurgling irrepressibly. "You know I didn't." "Do I indeed? I promise you I was in the liveliest dread that you would start at any moment to giggle. If you had seen your own face—" "Well, I own it was a very well-chosen, close-run thing with me," she admitted. "How are you able to answer him gravely, I can't imagine." "Oh, he has been on the town for as long as I have, so that I have grown inured to him. I can understand, of course, that the first sight of his magnificence must come as a severe shock." She laughed. "Yes, but I can't plead that excuse. I was forever seeing him last year. In fact, he prompted, after waiting for a moment for her to finish the sentence. She had broken off in confusion, the words, "I put him into my book," only just bitten back in time. She said now, with a tiny gasp, "Grew so accustomed to him that I began not to notice him, except when he came into a ball in a green velvet coat, and a waistcoat embroidered all over with pink roses." He did not immediately reply, and glancing a little nervously at him, she saw that the flying line of his brows was accentuated by a slight frown which drew down in their inner corners. He looked steadily at her, and said, "Yes, but that wasn't what you were going to say, is it?" She hoped her countenance did not betray her, and said, with a fair assumption of ease, "No, but I dare say I ought not to tell you what that was. You won't repeat it. It was not his appearance which nearly had me in whoops, but that peacocky chestnut of his, and the things he said of him. He brought him from Papa, and paid 300 guineas for him, and thinks himself a downy one." He burst out laughing, and she hoped the dangerous moment had passed. But although he laughed at Marlowe's successful essay at flat-catching, he said, "I am still wondering what it was that you really meant to say, Sparrow." She was thankful to see Major and Mrs. Newberry cantering towards them. There was time only to return a light rejoinder before Georgie called out to them, with news of a charming glade to be visited. They waited for Iant and Sir Nugent to come up with them, and there was no further opportunity for private talk. The incident cast a cloud over Phoebe's pleasure. She could not be comfortable. To uneasiness was added a strong sense of guilt, which was not rendered less by the flattering distinction with which Sylvester was treating her. It was scarcely to be called gallantry. Though he showed her wishes to be his first object, he quizzed rather than flirted, but there was a smiling look in his eyes when they met hers, and an informality in his manners that made her feel as if she had known him for a very long time. There had been a moment, before the Newberrys had joined them, when she had hovered on the brink of telling him just what she had done. She had been strongly tempted, and the temptation recurred several times, only to be driven back by fear of what the consequences might be. When Sylvester looked at her with warmth in his eyes, she felt that she could tell him anything. But she had seen him wear quite another expression, and she knew just how swiftly and with what perfect civility he could retire behind a film of ice. Perfect civility. She was still in a state of wretched indecision when she parted from him at the end of the day, but as she trod up the steps of Lady Ingham's house, she thought suddenly that if any one could advise her, it must be her grandmother, and she determined, if her mood was propitious, to tell her the whole. She found the Dowager in perfect good humour, but a trifle preoccupied. She had received a visit from an old friend, just returned from a protracted sojourn in Paris, and Mrs. Erthing's account of the delightful time she had spent there, the charming nature of the parties given by dear Sir Charles Stuart and Lady Elizabeth at the embassy, just as it was used to be before that horrid Bonaparte spoiled everything with his vulgar ways. The exclusiveness of society, so different from London, where one was increasingly at the mercy of mushrooms and tuft hunters, the comfort of the hotels, and the amazing quality and style of the goods in all the shops had reawakened her desire to remove to Paris for a few months herself. It was just the right time of the year for such a visit. The ambassador and his wife were old friends of hers, and Mrs. Irving had been charged with messages for her from quite a number of French acquaintances whom she had not met for years, but all who remembered her and wished that they might have the felicity of seeing her again. Well, she wished it too, and was much inclined to think it would do her a great deal of good to go abroad for a spell. She did not regret having assumed the charge of her granddaughter, of course, but it did just cross her mind that Phoebe might very well reside with Ingham and Rosina while she was away. A moment's reflection, however, caused her to abandon this scheme. Rosina was a fool, in no way to be trusted with the delicate task of promoting a marriage between Phoebe and Sylvester. The dowager was feeling very hopeful about this affair, but there was no doubt that it needed skilful handling. Rosina would be bound to blunder. Moreover, nothing was more likely to cause Sylvester to shy off than to find Phoebe always in company with her good, dull cousins. No, it would not do, the dowager decided. It would not do to take Phoebe to Paris either. The dowager was no believer in the power of absence over the heart, particularly when the heart in question belonged to Sylvester, who had so many girls on the catch for him. The project had to be abandoned, but Mrs. Irving's visit had roused many memories. The dowager fell to a reminiscent vein, and it was not until she and Phoebe removed to the drawing-room after dinner that she emerged from it, and bade Phoebe tell her about her own day. Phoebe said that she had enjoyed herself very much, and then, drawing a resolute breath, took the plunge. "Grandmamma, there is something I must tell you." She would not have been surprised if her confession of having commenced author had met with censure, but the dowager, once assured that a strict anonymity had been preserved, was rather amused. She even said that she had always known Phoebe to be a clever little puss. Possibly she considered it unlikely that her granddaughter's book would be read by any member of the ton. Possibly she thought it even more unlikely that a portrait drawn by so inexperienced a hand would be recognizable. She only laughed when Phoebe told her the dreadful truth. But when Phoebe asked her if she thought Sylvester ought to be warned of what was hanging over his head, she said quickly, "On no account in the world. Good God, you must be mad to think of such a thing." "Yes, Mum, only I can't be comfortable," Phoebe said. "Nonsense, you will know nothing about it," replied the dowager.